Blue Troopers Max models here. And today we're going to ask how come there were no F-47 Thunderbolts used in the Korean War. I thought perhaps I could find a picture of someone who had done a what-if build, but I wasn't able to. And that kind of surprised me because that's been a fairly common question with aviation historians and model builders alike. For those who don't know, the F-51D Mustangs that were used in the Korean War took horrific losses due to ground fire. The reason was simple. The Mustang was a great airplane, but it was an air superiority fighter. It had very vulnerable systems, particularly the radiator and the liquid-cooled system for the Merlin engine. The famous Thunderbolt, or Jug, which was still in service with the Air National Guard as the F-47, had the robust air-cooled radial Pratt & Whitney R2800, which could take a lot more damage than a Merlin without coming down, especially from small arms fire. In fact, it's the same engine that the Navy and Marine Corps were using in the Corsair. Now, to be clear, even the Sky Raider and the Corsair took pretty bad losses during ground attack missions. There was simply a lot of ground fire coming their way, but a Mustang could be taken out by a single .30 caliber round going through the coolant system. Given the young Air Force's primary emphasis on strategic bombing and potential nuclear war, ground attack aircraft had become a bit of a backwater. In fact, at the time, Colonel and later General William Momyer had proposed in 1948 that the only missions for fighter aircraft during a nuclear war were air defense and bomber escort. Needless to say, this put tactical air very far at the back of budget considerations. In April of 1951, Communist ground forces claimed 40 Air Force fighter bombers, including 25 Mustangs. As a result, Air Force Lieutenant General George Stratemeyer, commander of the U.S. Far East Air Forces, sent a request to Air Force headquarters asking if any F-47 Thunderbolts were available for use in Korea. He noted the tremendous increase in small arms fire and flak, but added that all here know the F-47 can take it. The situation was so desperate that he said he would gratefully accept just 25 Thunderbolts, then serving with the Hawaii Air National Guard. But in response to his request, General Hoyt Vandenberg, Air Force Chief of Staff, explained that considering the current availability of Thunderbolts and the lack of spare parts, and the problem introducing another type of fighter aircraft, they failed to see how any appreciable results would be gained by the substitution. Vandenberg admitted that the F-47 would likely confirm its reputation from World War II, proving to be somewhat less vulnerable than the Mustang, but converting pilots trained on jets to fly the Thunderbolt and then mechanics as well, plus all the parts and supplies, simply wasn't feasible. The Air Force had taken the F-47 out of inventory in 1949, and the only units that had them were Air National Guard units, the closest being Hawaii. But that being said, the post-war logistics of getting them over there in numbers were basically insurmountable. As a result, the pilots continued to fly missions in the Mustangs. In fact, the Mustangs had to soldier on until January of '53. By then, jets had taken over the mission, and all the jets had a much higher survival rate. The Navy and Marine Corps used the Sky Raider and Corsair throughout the entire conflict, but they took heavy losses, although not as bad as the Mustangs. Actual numbers have been almost impossible to come up with. And the Navy had actually developed the AU-1 version of the Corsair, which was set up for ground attack, although from what I've read, the pilots said it did not fly as well as the actual Corsair. It had a lot more armor plate, particularly covering the rather delicate oil coolers that were in the wings. Hits to those oil coolers had brought down quite a few Corsairs. So I was just thinking, it would be kind of cool to do a what-if build of a Korean War combat F-47 Thunderbolt. There's no question it would have made a better ground attack aircraft, although it had been virtually defenseless against MiGs. But then again, even a Corsair and a Sky Raider managed to bag a MiG, so you never can be too sure. This will actually play into the next video I'm working on, because it was as obvious to the Army as it was to the Tactical Air Force that close air support was not a mission that was front and center for the Air Force in the 1950s, which is totally understandable given the nuclear threat that the country was facing. And despite everything, there were still limited budgets, only so much money to go around. And this would have a pretty big impact on the development of Army aviation in the near future. But that, my friends, is a story for another time. I'm Max and Max's Models. Have any of you guys built a what-if Korean War Thunderbolt? I think I just might have to do that. Take care of yourselves, and as always, model on.